everybody, and welcome to another hobby cheating video. And today we're going to talk about our little friend Greenstuff. It's not green yet, it will be soon. So here I've just got a little strip of Greenstuff, and I've got a couple tools, and I've torn some off. This is going to be the absolute basics. We are going to cover just some very simple stuff with the Greenstuff. So what do I have here? Okay, well first I've got some Greenstuff. I think that's probably obvious. Good old yellow and blue. Lots of different companies make it. You can get it directly from GW. You can get it from Gale Force 9 and a bunch of other places online. It doesn't really matter. As long as it's the yellow and blue stuff, you're good. Now, I've tried some other brands and some other, like, sort of types of this epoxy putty, and I've never really been as happy with it, to be completely honest. So, you know, it's usually a little more for any kind of green stuff as it is other types of two-part epoxy putties. But I like this, so there you go. The other thing I have is a little mirror or something that's similarly non-stick. You can see we're looking at my paint rack there. This is going to be very essential to have something to work on. You want a nice, flat, smooth surface that your green stuff's not going to really stick to in the long run. So something like these little mirrors you can get from like the little dollar store or the craft store are pretty good. But if you have a like fairly non-stick surface, that's good. And then we've got a couple shaping tools here. I have no idea what these are called. I like them both. These are the two I tend to like. So this one has a little, I don't know, you can see how that's shaped. I don't know, a little pokey, speary-like tip. And then a little flatteny thing. These probably have names. I'm sorry, I don't know them. And then we've got the little sort of knife edge tool. And then a smaller little shapey tool. I know that doesn't help you. Look for things that look like that. I don't know what else to tell you. I'm sure if you just look for like green stuff shaping tools, which is what I did, you'll find those. Out of all the ones I got, those are the two I tend to like. There you go. Okay, so that's our basics. Now let's talk about mixing up green stuff. In general, for most of your projects, you're going to want to, you know, basically go about 50-50. You can play with the mix to get longer cure times or harder green stuff, but in the end, 50-50 is going to be right for 95% of what you do. The other way to talk about mixing it up. So one of the easiest ways to mix it up is to literally just pull it apart and put it back together. You kind of just push it together, and you just stretch and push, and stretch and push, and stretch and push. So you're like you're kneading bread. You can really see what I'm doing there. I'll try to do it at the right angle. And the reason why that tends to work pretty well, by the way, my fingers aren't wet or anything right now. It doesn't really matter. It won't stick to my fingers too much here. If you want to keep your fingers a little wet, that's fine, but you kind of want to be careful because you don't want to actually get too much liquid in here. One of the things I'm going to do in this is not use a lot of you're going to see me not use a lot of water or things like that. Like if it is sticking to your fingers a little too much, just take your paint water cup or something, kind of get a little tiny bit on your fingers, and just kind of work it in, so your fingers are just damp, as opposed to being like moist. Because if you get the green stuff wet, it's going to become problematic later. It's not going to stick where we want it to. But if it's sticking a little too much, like that, you know, there you go. So you can see I'm just kneading it by pulling it thin and then pushing it back together. And that tends to mix it pretty fast and pretty evenly. It's the same trick for bread. If you think about how if you've ever seen people make bread, the way they sort of pull it apart and then put it back together, it's literally doing the same thing. Okay, so now we've got a nice, you can see there, we've mixed that through, and now we've got some green stuff. So the thing I want to cover here in this basics green stuff video is doing some very basic sort of shapes and the things you're going to do it. The first thing I would say is, often you don't need, if you're doing something really big, you can do it on the model. But often if you're doing little accoutrement or little pieces or fixes, you want to do it off the model. And there's really two basic shapes you operate from. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just take a piece off here. Set the rest to the side for the moment. So, and then I'm going to kind of just roll it around into a ball on my hand. So the two basic shapes you're going to operate from are, and this is going to sound really funny, but are the ball and the snake. Okay? Ball. I don't think I'm doing anything too complicated here. When you need to shape into something fairly roundish, you're going to go for the ball. When you need filler or something long, you're going to go for the snake. And we'll cover the snake in a moment. But let's start with the ball. The ball is often going to become something like a teardrop. So if you're trying to do, here I'm just going to do like a ribbon or something. Okay, like let's say you wanted to put some extra ribbons or accoutrement down off a guy, like some hanging ribbons you want to paint text onto. Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of shape it roughly into a teardrop. Okay? Something like that. Little teardrop. Then I'm going to go ahead and put it down on my mirror. And you'll notice I'm not wetting the mirror or anything because I want it to stick to the mirror right now. That's part of the essential thing of what I'm doing. So then I'm just going to go ahead and flatten it out. Now on the top, if you want to, you take your finger, lick your fingertip. So I'm only getting it on the top. You don't want a lot of liquid in there. Just a little bit. Okay? So now I've got that little flattened out teardrop, right? Now, it's going to stick to this mirror aggressively. Good. That's what we want. We want it to stick to this mirror aggressively. Okay, so we got our two tools here. And if you want, you can take the flat edge and you can kind of push it down some more. If you've got a big, chunk that doesn't want to settle, you can push it out like that. But for the most part, your finger just kind of working it in will do the trick. All right. So we're going to make some ribbons. We start with our teardrop, and the techniques I really want to show you here are pretty straightforward. These are very simple things because, like I said, we're talking basics here. The first thing you want to think about is don't try to sculpt your final shape to start with. You build up to your final shape. Okay? So I'm going to do like 2 ribbons, like one with another one underneath it. Okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and just remove part of my shape here. Okay? And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to try to fashion it, there we go, into something a little more straight. Okay? So now I've got that. Okay? Next up, I'm going to take this little tool and I'm going to make this little edgy thing here. I'm going to make a guideline. So guidelines are another thing you really want to think about when you're working on Greenstuff. It's just a little flat line for you to come in and do work later. The reason you make a guideline is because when you push on Greenstuff, the other parts of the Greenstuff are going to move. By making a little guideline like that, I can then come in with this same tool, I'm going to come in with a little spear tool here, and what I can do is I can then push down this side. I'm going to flip this around. And if it sticks, so you notice my tool it's sticking a little much there. My Greenstuff's kind of fresh, and so it's still very, very sticky. Okay, we had too much stickage there, right? And I kind of pulled it apart. No problem. So what we're going to do is just I'm going to lick the end of the tool. Like literally, that's it. If you don't like to lick you don't like to lick your tool. Oh goodness sakes. If you don't want to lick the thing because you think that's gross, no issue. Just dip it in a little bit of water and wipe off the excess. Or if you've got a wet palette, that little sponge that your wet palette sits in is the best. But you notice I'm just pushing down along my guideline and flattening out part of it. Right? So let's see if we can get a side shot there. It's not really very visible, but there you go. Okay? You can see there. So now I've pushed this one side down. And you just kind of work with it to make sure you've got a nice because you want to get right up against the guideline. You want this to be very flat. because we want to create the illusion that one's over the other. Okay. So now you can see I've got one fairly defined ribbon and one that's kind of hinky-jinky. So now what we're going to do is the same thing. We're just going to go ahead and remove our excess that we pushed out here. Okay. Okay. And again, I'm just getting rid of this. So now we've got two little ribbons. Again, if we need to smooth it out, we'll take the little spear tool again. We kind of wet it a little with a sponge or the end of our tongue, and we just kind of smooth it down. We want to avoid getting too much wetness into this green stuff. The reason I'm not using like Vaseline or some kind of other thing like that is just because then it gets all sticky and you have to like really clean it and stuff like that, and you really don't need it. A little bit of just saliva or water off a sponge will do the trick. Okay, so now I got two little ribbons behind each other. But if I want to, like, you can mess with the size. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I just want to actually create the illusion of the ribbon, so I'm just going to go ahead and flatten them out at the bottom. And then I'm going to do the same thing up top to make them look like they're tied together. Kind of put that at an angle. And there you go. Just like that, I've got two little ribbons hanging down. Now, if I want to think about how like Stormcast look, how they have like the text in there. If you don't want to freehand the text, you can just take your little spear tool and you can kind of just poke in random patterns. Like you tend to want to be along a line. As though we had text. I don't know if you can see that, if that really comes through, but there you go. So then now if you wash that or something, you can do the same thing on the lower one. And I'm just literally like stabbing and letting my hand move around randomly. Because text at this size would be very, very small. So there we go. Now we've got two little ribbons with some text on them. Just that easy. Okay? Alright. So the teardrop can be good for a lot of things. When you need to, like, making like a cloak or something. You can start with the teardrop and you can shape up the cloak on here. Or if you want to do rope and stuff, you can, or chains, you can start with a teardrop. All these things can start with the teardrop. I guess chains would more often be the snake. But all those sorts of, the simple teardrop is the way to go for a lot of things. So let's talk about the other most common thing, which is the snake. So the ball and the snake. All right, so I'm going to tear off another little piece here. And again, you notice that most of the time when I'm working with this, now what I'm going to do with this one from here, by the way, is I'm just going to let that dry on there. Like, let that sit for hours. And then once it's all dry, I'm just going to be able to pop it right off of there, because it's not going to actually adhere to the mirror. Okay? So this time, I've got my green stuff. Instead, I'm going to roll it out like that a little bit. So I get kind of a little tube, right? Now, for this, we're going to move the mirror to the side here for a moment. Now this, my little mat here is fairly non-stick, although it's a little dirtier than I would normally like green stuff on, but that's fine. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to make a snake out of it, okay? And the way I'm going to do that is by pushing with my finger like that to just roll it out. By the way, when you're doing gap filling, the snake is where you start. So you can see when I push down, I'm not pushing down super hard. I'm just letting my finger roll along. And now we're getting a little tube. We're getting the snake. Once it gets long enough by doing this, okay, just applying light pressure and going back and forth, Okay, then we're going to take 2 fingers. Get off there. There we go. Take 2 fingers, and I'm going to roll and pull, and roll and pull, and roll and pull. You see how I'm pushing my fingers out? Start at the middle, move my fingers out, and as if by magic. Okay? Start at the middle, and roll my fingers out. Start at the middle, roll my fingers out. And look at how thin and even I was able to get that. Right? And it's just that easy. So now, if you need to fill a gap, you can lay that little snake right in there and just press it down. Usually for that, you're going to use one of these 2 tools. So the little shovel ends, I guess is what they're called. But you're going to use the 2 little scoopy ends, and you would just press them into the open gap. The other thing you can do with this is you can use this to make chains or ropes or something like that, right? So, for example, I won't make a whole chain because that would freaking take a while. But for example, if you wanted to make if you were going to make something like a chain, you could take that, you'd want to roll it out nice and thin. And then, so now I've just got my tweezers, and all I'm going to do is go through and start squeezing little pieces in. See, this is why I need to be on my mirror for this. Sorry. Let's go over to the mirror so I can actually stick it to it. So I'd stick down my snake here, and because you need a solid surface to work on. Okay. So there we go. Now we got my snake on here. I'm going to take my tweezers and I'm just going to squeeze and squeeze and squeeze. I'll just do 3 little links here. Okay. So now you can see I made 3 little indentations. And then next up, I'm just going to take my little flattener tool here, and I'm just going to push down on each little sausage link I made. Okay? And now you can see I'm starting to get something that looks a little like a chain. And the key here is by pushing down, we leave this part in the middle. Oops, sorry, my hand's in the way. I apologize. So we push down, we push down, we push down, and now we've got these flat little links with these raised sections in the center. Then you just grab anything pokey. Could be a toothpick. Could be, there's actually a little pokey tool. And you're just going to make a void in the middle of it. Right? And so now what I've got is something that looks like that. And you can make those, I made these really small or really big and quick. You can see how if you kept going with that, you could just make like a whole little link of chain or anything like that. You could flatten them out, you know, if you want to make sure they don't have that roundness that I have to it right now. You could come in and square them off, anything like that. So there you go. Just some quick, easy basics for your working with Greenstuff. We'll do more on this in the future, do some more complicated things. But the key is your teardrop and your snake are your basic 2 shapes. From these, you can really do a lot of things. Like if you're doing a cloak, you can start with a teardrop or a little like tabard or something. You can start with a teardrop, flatten it out, and then you can start laying on snakes and just pushing them in to build up the ridges, as opposed to trying to shape the ridge out of one piece. Start with a teardrop for your rough shape, go to the snake to add your height. All sorts of things like that. So, I hope this was interesting for you. Again, this is just the basics. We'll do some more stuff in the future. But if you liked it, give it a like. Always love it when people subscribe. If you've got anything you want to see in future hobby cheating videos, don't be afraid to leave that down below. And of course, the nicest thing you can ever do is share the tutorial with a friend. I always do appreciate that. And we'll see you next time. See you later.